That's right, and that's what happens. The patients end up suffering, and the doctors that are doing no service to the patients. I'm telling you this as I stand there in court, and the doctor shows up with a manila folder that has one piece of paper in it and a receipt. Now, I wanted to ask you something else, which we were getting into about the, I'm fascinated by the deficiency in the cannabinoid systems. That's always something that I've suggested. We had Dr. Lester Grimspoon on last week, who's I know you're friends with him and know of him, but he disputed. Yes. I asked him about that cannabinoid deficiency system, but I'm interested in that. But I also, as a physician, is it time for doctors to begin to become more aware of strains and dosages and methods of ingestion just beyond a certification? And I know that it's a fine line in terms of what can be recommended, but is it because like for example, some of the effects of the cannabinoid system of slowing and making fast, I would say, is dependent upon some of the strains, as we know. What's your thoughts on that?
Well, we're going to be giving a training, a pre-certification training, the afternoon before the cocktail party starting. Patients Out of Time. Patients Out of Time is having their every other year conference in Tucson, the 26th to the 28th, and the American Academy of Cannabinoid Medicine is going to have a 5-hour educational thing on Thursday the 26th, and for those that are interested, a certification exam on Sunday the 29th. And we're going to be talking about the endocannabinoid system. We're not going to be talking about strains, but we will be talking about cannabidiol, strains that are high in CBD, and we'll be talking about the entourage effect, which recognizes that terpenes have a role. I think the problem with getting into strains at this time is that our opponents have been so effective in this country at closing down real research that it's hard to pull out which strains have which cannabinoids in them. And I think we're going to be getting into this as we see people that have standardized strains like GW Pharmaceuticals looking at different cannabinoids. Also, I think as the industry matures, we're going to see more laboratories that tell you what different cannabinoids are in the various strains that are out there. So from my point of view, it's a little too early to require physicians to know strain-specific things. Part of the problem is that if you have something that is purple kush in dispensary A, is purple kush in dispensary B the same thing, or is it just a good marketing tool?
Good point.
So I think that doctors need to know more about the specific cannabinoids and the combination of cannabinoids to be able to give their patients good advice. I try to tell people about different methods of ingestion. Most of the patients that we get have experience with cannabis, but there are a fair number of people that come in that either have never smoked or smoked 50 years ago, and they may not be aware that you've got vaporizers, you've got individual vaporizers, you've got under-the-tongue sprays, you've got edibles, and you've got flavored drinks that have cannabis in them. And you also have Marinol or Dronabinol, which is a prescription medication. And I find that patients who are surprised to find themselves in my office talking about cannabis and cannabinoids feel reassured to realize that there are options other than just smoking a joint.
Tell the listeners, if you would, it's just as recently as I think the 60s, I think it was an Israeli scientist that discovered the cannabinoid system. Tell us a little bit about what impact it's had on, the treatment of some of these diseases we're talking about, and what, how does one go about from a lay perspective understanding it, and how, it works with the ingestion of marijuana or cannabis.
Right. I went to a conference in Jerusalem a little over a year ago, which was in honor of the 80th birthday of Raphael Mechoulam, who isolated THC in 1964 and was one of the people that characterized the endocannabinoid system in 1992. And the endocannabinoid system is the largest neurotransmitter system in the brain, yet in part because of the stigma that's been attached to it, we really don't know nearly as much about it as we should. There are two naturally occurring cannabinoids. One is named anandamide and the other is called 2-AG for short. We also know that there are two different kinds of receptors, which are not very originally called the CB1 receptors, which is largely in the brain, and the CB2 receptors, which are largely in the immune system and in the gut. According to Dr. Robert Melamede, who is a biologist at the University of Colorado, one of the things that the cannabinoid system does is it helps in homeostasis. That is, it helps the body be regulated so that we don't have various bodily functions going up and down and getting off kilter. And as I mentioned earlier, this retrograde inhibition tends to slow down the speed of neurotransmission, and that's probably why cannabis is effective in treating irritable bowel syndrome, seizures, migraine headaches. Any number of the therapeutic benefits of cannabis can be, at least in part, explained by the retrograde inhibition. I don't know, does that address some of the issues that you were hoping I'd talk about?
No, that's great. Let me take it a step further. What about as a preventative measure? As you speak about this and we hear of somebody who, I mean, I guess a condition could be the absence of the of these cannabinoid receptors being met, or, you know what I'm saying, is you know, someone, I mean, can you diagnose someone as a, you know, cannabinoid deficient? Or
not at the present time. I mean, right. you have to come up with that sort of indirectly and say, okay, look, this person has attention deficit disorder, or they have bipolar disorder, or they have Tourette syndrome, and now we're going to treat them with cannabis or with dronabinol, and they got better. Probably it was because they didn't have enough of their own endocannabinoids. And this is the whole idea of cannabinoid deficiency syndrome is something that's relatively new, and I think you're going to hear more about it as the months and years go on.
Well, moving into this other, you know, well, in terms of a preventative use, is that something that is discussed in the medical circles of amongst your peers? You know, in that by the balance that you're speaking of the equilibrium that one's overall system would have, even, you know, before it got to a symptomatic stage where one would have pain or be diagnosed with or fight off pain of something they didn't know was Crohn's disease or irritable bowel or depression or something like that. Is it? Are we there yet? That people, you know, that
we're not there yet. I think that's a very good question. There certainly are people who have conditions that respond very well to cannabis, but I'm not sure I'd call that prevention. In other words, I have patients who have a history of migraine headaches that say, if I smoke marijuana once a day, I don't have any migraines. And if I stop smoking, one of my patients said, I went to New York for a week and I didn't take any marijuana with me, and I had migraines 5 out of the 7 nights that I was there. I've had people with seizures. I had a woman who had a aneurysm that burst not once but twice, and she said, I have intractable seizures all day long, but if I stay just a little bit high, I don't have a seizure. So I wouldn't actually call that prevention in terms of primary prevention, but I certainly would call it secondary prevention. And there are a number of conditions that respond to cannabis. Now, one of the things that they found in Meshulam's lab is that cannabis is neuroprotective. And Meshulam invented a semi-synthetic cannabinoid called dexabinol, which he felt would be useful in preserving brain function in people that had traumatic brain injury or people that had strokes. Unfortunately, it's really hard to do a double-blind study to prove that. They did use this stuff on people who are put on heart-lung bypass machines, and what we know is that about 60% of people that are put on a heart-lung bypass machine have at least a temporary reduction in their cognitive functions. And in maybe half of those people, some of those reductions in cognitive functions are permanent. And by taking this dexabinol prior to having your heart surgery, you're much less likely to have that cognitive deficiency. Another thing in terms of preventing something from happening is that GW Pharmaceuticals makes liquid marijuana, tincture of cannabis. They started doing research with people with multiple sclerosis in 1999 for treatment of their neuropathic pain and their muscle spasm. And what they found was, even though the natural history of multiple sclerosis is that it is a progressive disease, that the people were getting the same relief from the same dose 10 years later that they got originally, which suggests that their condition was not getting any worse, and GW is planning on doing some specific research to see whether or not cannabis interferes with the progression of multiple sclerosis. Another thing that we need to look at, which you haven't asked me about, but I wanted to throw in here, is that at least 15 different cell types are responsive to cannabis in terms of killing cancer. Now, the studies have been done in cell culture and with mice, and we need to see these studies done in human beings, and that's why the AMA's position that cannabis should be rescheduled so we can do more research is so important.
Well, you know, we have in the studio with us a very heroic patient who is very open and speaks all over the state about his experience in using cannabis to cure his cancer. He had Mike McShane, speak to the doctor if you would. Tell him about your condition and what you went through.
Well, good evening, doctor. You mentioned Venice to the south and San Luis Obispo to the north. Are you in Santa Barbara?
Say again?
Are you in Santa Barbara this evening?
I'm in Santa Barbara, yep.
Oh, my favorite spot.
Out here?
Nice town.
It's my favorite spot.
Nice. And we got a pretty good city council now. Last year, not so good, but I think that they understand, you know, and I think it's really, politics is really important, and one of the problems with our movement is we have too many people that don't feel like voting and don't want to vote. I was able to motivate a number of my patients and my supporters, because I've run for political office, and we were able to get somebody elected to the Santa Barbara City Council who is very supportive of dispensaries and understands the role that medical marijuana plays, and she attributes her victory, at least in part, to the support that she got from people who believe in medical marijuana. And it's important for us to have as many physicians as possible that owe their election to the medical marijuana movement.